support for extremist anti-immigrant policies and white nationalist ideologies can be mediated by this longing for one's racial past. 158 white Americans filled out a survey about identity and racial issues in America. And in this study, we wanted to be a little bit more mindful about the ideology of our sample. MTurk leans liberal, and so we oversampled conservatives. All of our participants completed a 12-item identity measure that was adapted from Finney and included items such as, I have a strong sense of belonging to my own racial ethnic group. And participants completed 2 items that measured racial nostalgia. When I think about my racial ethnic group's past, I become full of positive emotions. And when thinking about my racial ethnic group, our best days were in the past. In terms of anti-immigrant attitudes, we were particularly interested in predicting some of the more extremist versions of anti-immigrant policies that we're seeing in rhetoric and in the news. And one example is, our country should use armed force against anyone crossing the border illegally. Participants also completed a white nationalism scale with items such as, in order to maintain white status, it is sometimes necessary to use violence towards racial ethnic minority groups. So the first thing we wanted to see is if white identity predicted endorsement of extreme anti-immigrant policies. And what we see is that there is a modest but significant relationship between white identity and extremist policies. But white identity especially was associated with racial nostalgia, which in turn was significantly associated with endorsement of extremist policies. And when we put all these variables in a process mediation model controlling for ideology, what we find is that racial nostalgia is a significant mediator. So the degree to which whites endorse extremist policies can be accounted for in part by their desire to recreate one's racial past. We did the same thing looking at the relationship between white identity and white nationalism, and we see an even stronger association. We already know that white identity is associated with racial nostalgia, but here racial nostalgia shows a much stronger effect size with white nationalism. And once again, when we put all of this into a mediation, we see that, that racial nostalgia is a significant mediator between this relationship, suggesting once again that to the degree that whites who are high in identity endorse white nationalist ideologies, this can be accounted for in part by a desire to recreate one's racial past. So to summarize, whites' association with extreme anti-immigrant attitudes and toxic racial identities is mediated by this idealizing of one's racial or national past, and this can obviously have some important implications. So groups